Hey everybody, it's Tim Hinton, the Beast of the Marching Arts. Thank you so much for being listening to this conversation today. We are talking about preparing for a job interview. There's going to be so much great information with us today. Bradley Wingate is here. Bradley, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I am good. Thanks for being here. Dr. Stephen Lytle is with us. Stephen, how are you?
Doing well.
Awesome. So thanks everybody for watching. Lots of great information about job interviews. Of course, we are music educators, and so we're sort of using that as our premise, but I think there's going to be information here for anybody going into any interview whatsoever. I'm sure that's going to be part of this too. So Bradley, why don't you go first and sort of introduce yourself?
Absolutely. My name is Bradley Wingate. I am the Director of Visual Performing Arts for Greenville County Schools in Greenville, South Carolina. I was a middle and high school band director for 13 years and then a high school assistant principal for a couple of years. And I've been in my district role now for 12 years and very happy to be here today.
Absolutely. And Bradley, I've known you a really long time because we met way back in the day when you were a band director and you used one of my marching arrangements with your band. And so
we actually go back even further than that. When I was student teaching in 1997 at Ridgeview High School, you did the show for them and you came in and worked. That's when we actually met. Yeah. So, yeah.
And one of my rules now is we're not going to do the math to figure out how many years that was. This is a standing rule for me now. It was just a couple days ago, it seems like.
That's right.
You're absolutely right about that. Those Ridgeview years were fun. And then thank you for continuing on with my music after that sometimes. So that was awesome. So anyway, you're doing a fantastic job supporting the music educators there in Greenville. Greenville's a wonderful city and so many great band programs up there. So thanks for all your hard work with that.
Thank you.
And Dr. Stephen Lytle, introduce yourself, please.
So yes, Steve Lytle. I am the coordinator for music and theater for Salem-Keizer Public Schools. We're out here in Salem, Oregon. I began my teaching career as a high school band and orchestra director in North Carolina and spent the next portion of my career as a college band director in Ohio and West Virginia and have been in this role currently for about 5 years now.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you guys for being here, preparing for a job interview. Everybody, they're organized. They have great information ready to go. So, Steve, I'll let you go first. Where would you like to start the conversation?
So, yeah, we're going to kind of walk, those who are on the call here through this sort of process that Brad and I crafted here, and thinking about what can people do in the sort of time leading up to when they're getting into the job searching phase. What are the things that to consider when you're in the actively, in the search phase, and then some things to consider if you get an offer or don't get an offer after that. So we're hopeful that the insights that we have will be something that will be helpful for folks to employ and use use it for a successful job search.
Yeah, no doubt about that. All right, well, let's get started.
So one of the first topics Brad and I want to talk about is the concept of building a network. So as you enter the job field, you really want to think about who out there who is active in the roles that I want to be in or I see myself being in, who knows me and knows my work. And so it's really, I think, a kind of a critical thing about, the idea of before I get out into the job market, that there are people out there who can advocate for me and can speak to my skills and to my strengths and say, yes, this is a good person. You should interview them for this role. And, a couple of things that come to mind, I pull back from my own experiences. So when I was a student and I was getting into this stage here, I would do things like I would, first of all, I would build relationships with my professors. Certainly the ones who were, because they were seen as the people that were active out in the schools. And I would say, hey, if you're going to clinic a band, can I come along with you? Can, even if I'm just a shadow on the wall. And usually that turned into, well, Steve, why don't you get up here, or why don't you take the trumpet players and work with them? And so that was an opportunity for me to do something, that got my name out there. I also did some summer work in a local repair shop. And so in our area, the educational reps were often the ones who knew where the job openings were going to happen first before the administration did. And so knowing who I was and knowing that I was a student that was going to be entering the job market soon was being in that shop was a great space and environment for me to get to know those folks. And then by extension, get to a sense of knowing what was going to be on the horizon in terms of potential openings. Brad, I was going to see if you had any experiences from your youth as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So much like you, I harken back to when I was an undergraduate at the University of South Carolina, and at the time there were some phenomenal band programs in Columbia, and one of the best things that I recommend is to reach out to the band directors in your area and just first off introduce yourself, and and then see, is it even an opportunity for you just to come out to just watch and observe, because and I would recommend that you do that with all types of band programs, not just necessarily your most high functioning, highly successful program, but as well as maybe, a program that has a first year teacher in it, or a program that maybe has historically struggled a little bit. So that way, A, the directors get to know you, and then B, you also get to see the kind of the inner workings of what high school bands look like from the teacher's perspective. Because I think sometimes, as an undergraduate, sometimes you think that every program is built and designed like the one that you came from, and you'll quickly see that things look very different. But getting yourself out there, just like Stephen said, and getting some face time with the directors, and when you have the opportunity to jump in to run sectionals or work band camp or do any of those things, I just highly recommend it. And sometimes that may be an opportunity to be paid for providing instruction. There may be lots of other times though where it's just observations and volunteer work, but just getting yourself in the middle of those programs, I think is super important.
Yeah, just to kind of tie things up with this, you obviously leverage the relationships you currently have, again, with your professors or other folks that you already have something established with. But then, the idea is that you begin to develop your own relationships with those folks. So if my college director introduces me to these three public school directors, that, over the course of time, then I'm starting to develop my own, direct relationship with them. It's not filtered through somebody else. Of course, right now there is any number of online forums that you can join and be a part of a larger community, and those are fantastic. And the only thing I would say with those is just be mindful about frequency of posting and types of things that you comment on or put out there. I've seen people who have been very effective with that, but we've also seen examples where maybe someone is a predominant voice or constantly posting or asking questions that could potentially backfire you, and it's like, well, why would that person not know that kind of dynamics? So just something to be mindful when you're in the online sphere.
And just one more thing to add to that. That's a great point, Stephen. Most principals today, before hiring an individual, not only do they have to call and check references, but in a lot of cases, they're required to do a background kind of check just in terms of the social media presence of the candidates that they're hiring. Again, just so that way, everybody's completely aware and above board that of the individual that they're hiring for their school. And a lot of times that directive may come from human resources and all of this. So as Stephen alluded to, not just in the band world in terms of like having your voice out there, but, just be mindful of things that you're posting on social media, because, that leaves a digital footprint that a lot of times is very easy to find and search. And if when weighing two candidates that are of equal skill set, a lot of times they will end up having to go with a candidate who has a not so vocal digital print, if you will.
Good point. Excellent point.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I'm going to jump in here and just say, I think relationships are everything. And the fact that you guys sort of started with that, I think is super smart, because this is a small band world we're all in. And I have encountered the same people over and over and over the years. And I always want to try to leave a happy feeling in everybody's, in my wake whenever I come or go. And the part about the social media, man, couldn't be more important. If you're watching live, please type any questions or comments into the comment section, and we will be happy to answer those, or, have any comments that you have shared in all this. Okay, back to you guys.
Brad, you want to lead us on the next topic here?
Yeah, so the next topic is don't make their decision for them. So know the difference between a job you don't want and one that you're nervous about. So I think what this really means is that you need to do a healthy amount of homework about the programs to which you are applying prior to actually hitting the submit button on the application. If you know from the get-go that you're not going to have a genuine interest in accepting an offer, then that's not the program that you need to apply to. If you're a little bit nervous about it, that's 100% natural. I think that I think everybody will tell you that you're going to have questions. You're going to feel a little nervous, whether it's a struggling program or maybe it's a great program that's well established, and you have concerns about, are you going to be able to keep the paddles in the water and keep things going? So know the difference between the job that you want and then one that makes you nervous about it.
Yeah, I was going to say, and that expands, we're sort of in a band context here, but you might look at a job that is part-time band, part-time general music, or it's going to be band and choir. And so if you know for facts, like, I do not want to do that, then great. Yeah, Brad's absolutely right. Don't apply for those jobs. But it's one of those things where I don't know, it's not my skill set, but I really want to teach music. Then don't be afraid with that. Another thing I was going to say is, there is always going to be minimum requirements for a position. And some postings will say, okay, here's what we expect from everybody. Now, if you also fit this profile, this is kind of really what we're looking for. And unless it's something along the lines where you just know you cannot meet their expectations, don't discount yourself. If they're saying, we're looking for someone with X, Y, and Z, and you're like, well, I got Z. If you don't apply, then you've made the decision for them. Let them be the ones that will, make the ultimate decision whether to advance you or not. Because one thing about search committees is you don't know all the constraints or limitations that they are working with. Maybe there's something about time that timeline that they have to adhere to. Maybe something that's budgetary, where a younger teacher is going to be more, able to fit within the budget footprint they have for FTE. There's any number of other things that could be at play in the search process that, when they launched the search, wasn't aware to them and then becomes aware to them. So don't sell yourself short unless it's something you don't want or something you're clearly not going to be qualified for.
And I'd like to also kind of piggyback off of what Stephen was talking about. If it's a split position, so say, for example, it's band and choir or band and orchestra, from my perspective, if you aren't necessarily comfortable teaching choir or orchestra, but you think you can do it for a little bit, enough just to kind of get them over the hump, very important question to ask during the interview is, do you ever, or even prior to the interview, do you ever see this being able to be split apart into only band or only choir or only orchestra? And if the answer to that is yes from the school, then the next question after that is, then what's the magical number? What's the magical enrollment number in order to make that happen? Because the thing that you always have to remember is that student enrollment drives just about every decision that's made in a public school system. And so, for example, a good scenario, if it's a split band choir position and it's a very small 1A school, the likely chance that you're going to have 75 to 100 kids, which would allow you to have a full-time band position, that may or may not happen in a very small situation. So I think some of those important but direct questions about does the district or the school ever envision the position being split apart so that it's band only? And then if the answer is yes, then know up front kind of what that expectation is. And sometimes you may ask an administrator that, and they may not have that answer, but at least it prompts the question of, how do you get to where you want to be if that's not necessarily doing a split position is necessarily what makes you happy.
And the other thing with that is you might discover something about you as a teacher that you didn't know before. You might decide. From my own example, I was trained as a trumpet player. Clearly, was going through the band pathway. In my second year teaching, I was asked to take over the school's orchestra program and discovered I really love this ensemble. The kids were great, of course, but I loved the repertoire that I was able to work with that I hadn't even considered before. And so that prompted 10 years of being, a split band and orchestra director. And if I'd been reluctant on that, I would have missed out on that opportunity.
Likewise, in my last position before moving into administration, I'd never taught guitar before. And when I took my job, I had 2 guitar classes, and it ended up being the highlight of my day because it was just a lot of fun. And so, yeah, I mean, that's a great point. Don't be afraid to explore your boundaries. But if you do get into a situation where it's a split and you want to know, eventually will that ever turn into a full-time job? I think you need to ask up front, like, what's the expectation on student enrollment?
Brad, let's talk a little bit about the materials that people should kind of have on hand and how to organize them. So let's say you are in your student teaching right now, and you're starting to see jobs that are coming available that you want to apply for. One of the things I always did when I was in the active job search market is, for whatever job I had, I always had a dedicated folder for that particular position. So I'd set myself up, and back in the ancient times, I had an expanded folder, and I had this file pocket. I had paper copies of everything, but some way that I was at a sort of 30,000 foot level, I was able to manage the active searches, because you wanted clearly you wanted to make sure you didn't forget anything. You didn't forget who you were applying to, what role it was, whatnot. So that kind of organization would be the first step. Anymore, I think most positions, they're going to ask for some kind of evidence of your work. So, and I think as part of most teacher preparation programs now, constant video evidence of your teaching or performance is something that you're already collecting. I would maintain a private channel on YouTube or something else where I could add samples of me as a player. If I was still an active player, I would definitely have video samples of my teaching and rehearsal, so someone could get a chance to see how I am with an ensemble. And then I would have video samples of me in a conducting situation in performance, be it a festival performance or a concert performance. And with that, I'd try to edit it down so it's not the first 5 minutes are the principal talking and introducing you, and then you walk out, and then there's tuning, and then the evidence or the performance happens. With the written materials, I would say, obviously make sure whatever you have that somebody looks at it from a proofreading standpoint. And one of the tricks I always use is if I write something down, if I write a letter or whatnot, I will read it out loud to myself. So if I stumble over reading something, it's a very clear indicator to me that it's constructed wrong. The grammar's wrong, or the syntax feels clunky, or I've added too many words in there to communicate what I'm trying to communicate. So reading through out loud is a really good thing. And obviously, clearly, make sure there's no spelling errors or syntax errors or grammar errors in there that would not reflect great on a candidate. Brad, do you have any thoughts on that stuff so far?
Oh yeah, I have lots of thoughts on this.
I think we both probably have seen some things like, oh.
Yeah. So if you were applying to multiple positions, be 100% certain that the communication that you send to a particular job is aligned to the position that's being advertised for that district. So in other words, I work for the Greenville County School District. I shouldn't receive a cover letter from a candidate that says something about the position in Richland, South Carolina. Often, because people are applying to multiple positions and they get to moving really fast, they sometimes will forget to edit that back out. So every resume and every cover letter needs to either be generic enough that it covers all positions, or if you want to be specific, then be sure that if you're doing that for each individual position, that you actually edit it to the point to where you send the right materials to the right job. I think the other piece that Stephen talked about, having samples of your work online, is a great point. I will say, if you are a veteran band director and you've been teaching for a couple of years, when you have videos out on YouTube for winter concerts, spring concerts, marching band, things of that nature, just remember, like I said earlier, that leaves a digital footprint. So when you are applying to positions, it is very easy for, if there's somebody like, myself and a director of visual performing arts who's working with the principal. A lot of times I can kind of help the principal navigate through some of that by pulling some video samples. And I can recall a position a couple of years ago where the principal asked me to sit in on an interview, and it had several band parents and this and the other. And I literally pulled up 3 candidates worth of videos, and I said, and each candidate had been at your school anywhere from 5 to 10 years, which is plenty enough time to say this band that you're seeing on the field is a reflection of that teacher. And I showed the committee, I said, this is what you're going to get from this candidate. This is what you're going to get from this candidate. It's very important to remember, if you're a veteran teacher, that the things that you leave out on YouTube is a direct reflection of what potential employers may find. So all of that to say, be sure that you put out your best and brightest, and in terms of like what you have produced. I think the other piece to it is, when you are applying with your materials, you need to know, and this may be a little bit later down in the in our outline here, but know the process for applying within the specific district where you are applying. So, for example, if there's an online application through the district human resources system, as well as sending that resume and cover letter directly to the principal, and then a lot of times candidates will send it to myself. Sometimes if you leave out one of those parts, for example, you just send your resume directly to the principal and you don't apply online, that will eliminate you sometimes for consideration. So just keep yourself organized and know what's expected of you. And make sure that, at least from my perspective, I think it's always wise to kind of hit all 3 of those. So make sure you apply online, send your materials directly to the principal, and then if there is somebody at the district office that oversees visual and performing arts, send it on to them. So that way you've got all your bases covered.
Yeah, absolutely. I always consider, if somebody reaches out to me and just as a courtesy says, hey, I'm applying for it, here is my materials, I always respond back, say, thank you so much. Let's take a look at these. Do make sure that you do apply online, because we can only consider applicants who have completed the formal application process.
And to take it all the way back to what we talked about at the beginning, if I know the candidate because they put themselves inside of our band programs in Greenville County, or they've taken the time to introduce themselves to me at things like All County Band or Region or All State, then a lot of times if I know that candidate has a good work history with our band programs, I will then forward it on to the principal. But if I don't know the candidate, 9 times out of 10, I do the exact same thing that Stephen said. I'll say, thank you so much, I really appreciate it. And if principals ask me for a list of resumes that I've received, I'll be glad to send it on them. But typically, I'm not going to put my stamp of approval on sending it on unless I know that person.
Mm-hmm. Brad, I love the idea of just proofing for making sure there's continuity in there. Yeah, the idea that you list one school at the top of the letter and then close mentioning another district or another school is, that's the kind of proofreading that you want to make sure that you do that, so you avoid those kind of embarrassments like that.
That's right.
With the resumes, for me, I keep it corporate. Nothing in color, because generally we're going to view them in black and white. So sometimes the colors make it illegible. I would say also avoid mixing fonts. Certainly nothing that would be fancy or frilly or anything like that. But even just headers at one font and then the text below it is something different. That kind of it's just visually jarring, and it just takes a little bit more effort to read through. It doesn't read as easily. So I just keep that in mind. I prefer, if I have this job, we did this, the bullet points, keep them like 3 or 4 bullet points. I like action verbs. I led, I did, so things that say clearly indicated your role in this. I managed, I supervised. Even if it's, student teaching, we know that, if it's you're an assistant director or anything that says assistant, student teaching, whatever, we know that there's somebody else that, was working with you. Still lead with action statements rather than I had a responsibility for. That's a lot of language, and it's also a very passive predicate clause. I did, than task. And I think that just, it comes across as a bit more direct and a bit more economical language. And I feel like that just presents the candidate in a stronger position.
Absolutely. And my 2 cents on the resume piece, I'm so happy that someone sat first chair in their college wind ensemble. That's an amazing accomplishment. Or you were first chair, all state band, and all of that. However, that's not really going to carry, at least from my perspective. I don't think it carries a tremendous amount of weight in terms of when a principal is looking at the resume. They will look at that and then keep on going. So if you need to fill up some real estate on the resume, that's fine, but I would not necessarily lead off with that. I would lead off with exactly what Stephen said, with those action verbs, specifically focused around what some sort of successful teaching experience, whether it was volunteering to provide lessons at a school, running sectionals, working band camp, because what they really want to see is, because there's an expectation that when you come out of undergraduate that that you have the content, and that and that you're already a strong musician. So what they really want to see is, okay, but can you teach, which is the job that you're applying for. So I would say highlight those teaching experiences as best as you can.
So Brad, why don't we talk a little about communication? So they've applied, and now they're in that stage between they've sent an application in and potentially getting into an interview situation.
Absolutely. So while we understand that people of a certain age prefer texting, I would venture to say most people who are doing the hiring are not going to text or be willing to text back and forth with candidates. I would say that you need to make sure that you have voicemail readily available, that you check it, that you don't leave your inbox completely full. And then also on your voicemail message, you need to make sure that that the voicemail that you have up is appropriate and professional. I think he says if a potential employer texts you, then you can assume they tried other means of communicating. The other thing to remember is, depending on the job and the position, there may be a number of highly qualified applicants. And so if they are having difficulty getting in touch with you, then it's very likely that they're going to move on to someone else. So just make sure that all modes of communication are open and available to you. But just have your phone ready. Make sure that voicemail is ready to go. And when you get the voicemail, make sure that you return that phone call within 24 hours, if at all possible.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. When you are in the active stage of having job applications out there, you're never off the job. So maybe it's the summertime and you're going on vacation and you're going to be potentially, inaccessible for a period of time. I think it would be appropriate if you're going to be in a situation like that you connect with the places that you applied to and get a sense of their timeline. If you're planning a vacation at certain time or going to be away at certain time, and they say, oh, we were going to do our interviews at that time, then that's a point of decision you have to make. And sometimes you may have to make some hard decisions on your own plans to get the job. But the idea that going off grid or just taking a break from email or phone or whatnot, just for whatever personal reasons you have, during the job search time frame, or if you're in that situation, I just don't think you have that kind of luxury or liberty to be able to do that, unless you absolutely know that the timeline for the places you applied for will not conflict. And even then, I'd still feel like I want to make sure I'm at least once a day I'm checking in on various communication threads just to make sure I'm not missing something.
And I would also say, to piggyback off of that, the further we move into the spring and into the early summer, typically the faster the hiring process happens, because we all know that we want the best and the brightest in each of these positions. And so principals are typically ready to move pretty quick the further we get into the spring and summer, because the pool of applicants tends to decrease by that point. So I would say, especially during that peak vacation time at the beginning of the summer, if you've not secured a job yet, you need to be ready and agile and ready to go at a moment's notice, because you never know, a teacher may retire, or they may become ill at the 11th hour. And so principals really want to get that taken care of. And so going off grid or not returning voicemails or emails and things like that, it's just not something that they have a whole lot of time to waste on. So it's really, really important that if you really want that job, that you make yourself as accessible as possible. And in terms of, again, just going back to email, just make sure that you're checking your email on the regular. It's one of those things that once you actually start teaching, you're going to have to do that regardless. But if you're not in a habit or practice of checking your email at least once a day, I highly, highly, highly recommend that you get into that. If you feel so inclined to have your email forwarded into your phone, that's a good way to be able to see things as they come in. And then also just make sure that the email address that you have available, or the one that you use on applications, is twofold. One, make sure that it's a reliable email address. And so that, for example, if you've already graduated from your college and you're still using your college email address and you don't have access to that anymore, you need to make sure that you go in and update that email address for any positions that you've applied to. The other thing is just make sure that it's a professional email address name, so that if you've had an email address for since you were 14 years old and you chose something really funny as your email address name, that might not necessarily be the best option to use on job applications. So make sure you're checking it often, make sure that it's readily available, and then make sure that it's professional.
Yeah, absolutely. And the best email address is the one that clearly has your name in there. And if you happen to be Joseph Smith, you may have to do a variation on that. But the idea that maybe the one that you chose when you were a kid, was an inside joke. Keep that one for friends and family, and then create a brand new one for the job search or the professional things that you're going to be doing.
Steve, if you don't mind, let me add one more thing too.
Yeah.
This is going back to the being flexible. I would also recommend that when a school or a district calls to set an interview, if at all possible, if all of the interviews are set up to be in person, if at all possible, if you can be there in person rather than doing a Zoom interview, my recommendation would be to try to be there, even if it means if you have to drive an hour or two to go to that. Just because, again, not that a Zoom interview is a bad thing, but I think sometimes you can convey your desire to work in a place. Sometimes the people who are interviewing you, if it's a large group, can feel like they have a little more connection with you if you're actually sitting in the room. So again, there will be circumstances and times when an in-person interview will not be possible. So that's fine when it's appropriate. But if it means that you have to inconvenience yourself just a little to get yourself there and it's possible, my recommendation would be there.
Yeah, absolutely. And if they are interested in you and the proposed date doesn't work with you, it's a little bit of a gamble, but you can ask if there's flexibility. And that's absolutely, you can do that. Let's say you're a working teacher and the day that they have their interview is the day of your dress rehearsal, or that night is going to be a concert with your students, and you don't want to disrupt your students' experience for this. That is completely a valid, point, and you can ask for, what flexibility they have, and they might be able to be, if you're something they really want to talk to, they may be willing to work with you on that. I think there'll be limits to that, saying, I can't do it now, but in 2 weeks I'll be available. That, I think that would be something that's like, well, okay, maybe this is not the timing for us for this, because we do need to move along. But, if there's a valid reason why you couldn't make the suggested date, it's certainly within your right to ask if there's flexibility within that.
Right, and to your point, you got to remember when they are assembling a team of people to participate in an interview, often it's the principal. Sometimes it may be a student, maybe a couple of parents. If there's someone from the district office, so the principal typically, or whoever the principal has tasked with setting up the interviews, they're juggling multiple schedules. So to Stephen's point, you can certainly ask if there's flexibility, if there is a genuine extenuating circumstance. But if it's just because, I can't even think of a good excuse. But if it's not a legitimate excuse, I would certainly not ask for that flexibility on that particular day.
Right. Well, Brett, let's talk just a little bit about let's say that our folks have passed through all those things and they're at the interview stage. A couple things, just, this isn't a mock interview webinar here, and so I don't want to belabor this too much, but things about the interview that I think will be in good stead with anybody would be, obviously, be early. I like to try to give a candidate a full scope of, okay, arrive by this time. This is the time we have for this activity. This is the time we have for this activity. So I try to give them a sense of how they can plan their day, but just get there a little bit early so you get a chance to be settled. Things that come up in travel, traffic, whatnot, become non-issues if you build into that time for yourself. Clearly, try to learn as much as you can about the community and about the program itself. You can ask questions, certainly, of the people in advance of that, but do a little bit of your own homework as well on that, so you understand what is unique about the place that you're interviewing with. Clearly dress professionally. It doesn't have to be, kind of like the quote unquote Sunday best, but something that would convey that you're serious about this position and you're a serious person about presenting the best image for yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was also going to say some questions that you might anticipate that might come your way is typically a principal is probably going to ask you, how would you structure your class or rehearsal? So, if you're on block scheduling, that would be walk me through 90 minutes of what you would do if I were to walk in and watch a band class. They may or may not ask you about how you would handle discipline situations. A lot of times they will ask you about how you would plan to recruit and retain students. And then also a lot of times they may ask you about like how you would approach budgeting, fundraising, booster clubs, things of that nature. And when answering those questions, you just need to make sure that you're concise, you give thoughtful responses that kind of highlight your skills and experiences. But it's really exceptional if you can use real life examples to demonstrate your particular level of effectiveness in terms of any of those questions that they ask. If they happen to stumble on a question that you just absolutely do not know, don't fake it. There's nothing wrong with just saying, I'm not exactly sure right now, but I will be happy to go find that answer and get back to you when you hire me. Or something like that. But there's nothing wrong with providing a little humor there, but don't make up an answer to something that you don't know, that you don't have a solid answer on.
And also your interviewers will know, if you're young in the profession, they'll expect there'll be a different set of expectations about your experiences to that point versus somebody who's 10, 15 years into the profession. Right. And so don't sweat about the things you haven't experienced yet or don't know, because you can't change that. That's what life and experience will provide for you. But Brad's absolutely right. Just if there's something that you do not know, and don't feel the crush of, oh my gosh, I have to answer this. I have to come up with something in the moment there. Just say, I don't know. And, you can be a little bit more, explanatory than that. But, the idea is you're being straight with them and being honest with them. And it's a conversation.
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with asking them to repeat the question, or can you rephrase that? Or better yet, you could say something along the lines of, can you give me more details about what you're asking? So that way, sometimes they can help kind of phrase things in a way that's a little easier to understand. I think it's also important through your responses to show that, yes, you're a highly skilled and competent teacher, but you love students and you love music, and that you love teaching, and that band is the vehicle by which you go about teaching music, basically. So in most cases, what I would say is the principal is not necessarily looking for the highest skilled professional person who is like, a professional trumpet player. What they're looking for is someone who loves teaching and who loves kids and who uses band to convey that back to their students. So leaning in on those communication and collaboration skills, you will always, always, always win brownie points if you talk about collaborating with orchestra and chorus in some capacity. Even if there's a possibility to talk about how you might potentially share students, if there are students who have interest in both instrumental music as well as choral music. And then also you need to make sure that you have some questions ready at the end. It doesn't need to be 11 or 12 questions. It needs to be 2, 3, I would say probably at maximum 4 thoughtful questions. And it needs to be questions things that you couldn't necessarily research on the internet to find out about the school or the program.
Yeah, and then if there's anything that's related to performance that you have to do, skills, be prepared for those. So you might be asked to perform something on your primary instrument. Definitely want to brush up on your secondary instruments. Whether it is, in our interview process, we will often have candidates perform on their instruments, and then we provide the secondary instruments for them. But in other situations, you might get questions. If you're a brass player, tell me about this woodwind fingering, or tell me about the pitch tendencies on this instrument. And so do get, it's been a couple of years since you've been in an instrumental methods course, then get those books out, get those notebooks out, definitely get those instruments in your hand and brush up on those skills a bit. And if you're leading a rehearsal, if there's a rehearsal episode with a student ensemble, my 2 things are connect with the kids and make a noticeable change for the better in the ensemble. You won't have a lot of time to do that, maybe a 15-minute window, and maybe that is inclusive of time for the kids to ask questions of you. And so as long as you'll be given music ahead of time, it's okay, don't worry about playing the entire piece. Maybe focus in on a small section, but make it better than when you started with them. And then just have fun with the students and give everybody a sense of, this is who I am as a teacher. This is how classes will be, and these are the types of ears I have. And
to Stephen's point, specifically if you're a percussionist, and this is me alone when I'm in an interview. If the principal is okay with it, most of the time I will start drilling in, asking some tone production pedagogy questions. So I might say to them, all right, walk me through how you have a beginning trumpet player, walk me through having them open the case all the way up to making the first sounds on the instrument. Walk me through and help me get the student to play in open G or something like that. Or if they're percussionists, I may ask them, just drill around a little bit on woodwind fingerings, just to get an idea of, does this person have the base knowledge of what we would hope that they would have walking in the door? Because again, once you're given an offer for the job and you have that contract and it's signed and, the door closes, it's you and the students. And then that's when it's time for music to happen. So our job is to make sure that the person who winds up in that spot has all the tools in their toolbox before they ever get there.
And I love that question, Brad, because it not only gives you a chance to reveal what you know about the pedagogy, it gives us an insight on how you sequence instruction. Mm-hmm. In other words, if there's, we start at point A and then the destination is point B, do you give a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or is it A, B? So, to the degree that you can think through, process and steps to mastery is a great indication about how you think teaching evolves.
That's right.
And how learning happens.
So if that question comes your way, don't freak out, or if those questions come your way, don't freak out, because, sometimes, if you're a first year teacher and, you had your woodwind methods class, your sophomore year or your junior year in college, we know that part of that will be on the job learning, but we need to be able to see that you have most of those foundational skills there, because again, at the end of the day, you're going to be the one teaching those foundational skills to the students. And if we don't see those things in an interview, then how will we ever know, or how can we ever expect that to happen to students?
So Brad, why don't we talk to them about the post-interview that sort of that window between, they finish the interview and then a potential offer comes through. And then we can talk a little bit about, things about getting the offer or not getting the offer.
Absolutely. So it is always appropriate and nice to send a follow-up email to the committee, to the full committee, if you can remember who all's there, but definitely to the committee lead, whether that's the principal. And then in that email, it's always really good to highlight the things that you found that you liked about the program and the school. Typically in the interview, they will typically give you some sort of idea about the timeline, but if for some reason, if that doesn't happen, or if you forget to ask that question, you can definitely ask that in a follow-up email. If that timeline has passed, so they gave you the deadline of when they felt like they were going to have a decision made and you've not heard back, it is totally fine for you to contact them, again, just to see if an offer had been made, because sometimes what will happen is an offer will have been made, the timeline will end, an offer has been made, and either the person has not made a decision or it has not routed all the way through the hiring process with human resources. So a lot of times principals will not send the "thank you for coming, but we've gone with another candidate" email until the candidate that they selected has been officially hired, because if something falls through with their number one, then they at least have a backup number two, because there would be nothing worse than if you're the number two and you got the "thank you for coming" email, but we went with somebody else, and then the principal comes back and says, "Oh, by the way, our top candidate wasn't selected." So they always kind of hold their cards a little close to them, but it's totally fine to reach back out to them if that deadline is passed. It is not uncommon for schools and districts to be absolutely radio silent after the interview until an offer has been extended or accepted. So if they don't reach out to you directly and immediately, don't get your feelings hurt. Don't worry. Just once you hit that timeline, the deadline of the timeline that they set, then at that point it's okay to reach back out to them, because usually a decision has been made by that point.
Yeah, and this all, and I understand. We all understand this. It's the question is like, when do I contact? How often do I contact? I mean, what Brad is laying out is perfectly fine. Certainly if they've reaching out right afterwards to just say thanks, and if their timeline is going longer than they initially said, certainly reach out to them. I'd just be careful about the constant contact. Day one, day plus one of the deadline. Have you made a decision yet? Day plus two of the deadline. Just following up on my yesterday email. Then it starts to get a little kind of sticky in terms of over communicating.
And I think we're probably going to talk about this in just a second, but if for some reason if you interviewed for this job and you really, really, really liked it and you got a good feeling from it, and of course you're out interviewing in all the other places, if you get an offer from somewhere else, it is totally fine. It is 100% fine. And actually, we prefer that you reach out to us to say, "Hey, I've got an offer for somewhere else. Just wondering, where are we on the timeline? I've got an offer elsewhere." And of course, you would have to figure out how to say this very professionally, but am I a serious candidate for consideration of this? Because the other thing is, you don't want to leave your other offer hanging if this is a position that you're really interested in. And if you're not a serious candidate that they're considering, then, and a lot of times the principals will tell you that if you ask them directly, So it's totally fine to reach out and say, "Hey, I have another offer. Is there any opportunity for me to know within an appropriate amount of time so I can make a decision on this other position?"
Yeah, this is kind of the delicate dance, because let's say you get an offer on the table, and I mean, regardless if it's something you want to take or you're weighing your options with other potential offers, it is absolutely okay to say, "Thank you so much. I appreciate the offer. This is a big decision. Can I have some time to consider everything?" And I'm never going to say no to that. Generally, I like to keep those decision windows to a day, maybe a little bit beyond if it's other circumstances. But you can absolutely ask for that, and then yes, if it's the job you want, then do the homework that you need to do in terms of really making sure that you say yes with confidence. If it's a job that you're like, I would probably be great with this job, but there's this other one that's really interesting to me, then that's where, like what Brad says, you can call them and say, I do have an offer on the table. Can you give me a sense of your timeline within this? Pardon me. And that will help, if they don't, if you get a sense from them, then they're not going to be able to make a decision in the window of time that your existing offer has, then, you're going to have to wrestle with that decision. But that's part of this process. That's part of the, kind of, making your decisions for your career. I would say that if, I'm sorry, I'm looking at my notes here, right here. If you get an offer and then another one comes in, obviously make the call to your, the one you're going to decline as soon as possible. If it's at a point where you've not signed a contract yet, then you're technically under no obligation to that district, although you clearly want to make sure that they have enough time to, if it's within the window that they can go to their next candidate without disruption in their process, that is the best situation. If it's one of these things where they're going to have to reopen, then that's a delicate conversation. If you have any thoughts that you would like to work in that district at a future date with another position, then this is the time where you really wanted to manage the relationship with that district, because this is going to be a disruption to their planning and to their calendar and their staffing. But we understand that things come life. Maybe you have a partner that all of a sudden gets a job offer that's out of state or in some place else that you're going to move with them, and that's the circumstance that surrounds this. So it's a delicate thing, but that's part of the adult life and making career changes or choices.
Right. I actually have two things. One is an example that happened to me actually in 1997. I graduated December 15th and did not have a job and was trying to figure out, okay, my apartment lease is up on December 31st. Where am I going? And I left that morning to go out and run errands. And when I came back, talking about having your voicemail ready, this was back when we had answer machines. I came back and I had 2 phone calls from 2 school districts that I had interviewed with the week before. And so I called the one that I really wanted to go to first, and hoping that that it was an offer, and it was. And I told them, I said, I tell you what, can I have 24 hours? They said absolutely yes. And so I called the other district back, and it's the same thing. It was an offer, and I said, can I have 24 hours? And they said yes, absolutely. So a real life example of you may have 2 offers come in at the same time or within days of each other, but it's okay to ask for that window of time, but it needs to be reasonable. A week and a half or 2 weeks is not reasonable. At that point, the committee that's hiring you is going to need to move on to the next candidate. So just remember to keep it as compact as possible. The other thing is, if you interview and you know that this position is not for you, before the committee gets to the point of extending an offer, you need to call them, email them, send smoke signals, do something. But you need to let them know that you would like to remove yourself from consideration, because it is difficult when a committee takes the time to gather, and 9 times out of 10, there's usually one person that stands out. In some cases, you may have 2 people that are remotely close, but a lot of times there's a clear front runner of who you really want. It's just much easier on the front end if you remove yourself from the conversation. Before the offer is extended. And I can also tell you with the school district, at least from my perspective, if you are extended offers more than one time and you turn it down more than one time, the likely chance of someone in my position sending your name forward to a principal again for consideration is probably little to none. Okay. So that's the reason why you need to know ahead of time, either before the interview or immediately after the interview. If you just know that it's not going to work, you need to go ahead and remove yourself from the conversation and just to politely thank them, because what you don't want to do is burn bridges and make people feel like they've wasted their time by going through this whole process, finding the person they really wanted, and then that person saying, you're not really what I wanted. So that's just my 2 cents.
And if you do get an offer and you're seriously going to accept the offer or whatnot, I mean, I would say that your search, how active you are in the search process for anything else should change. And so that, in other words, if I say yes, and then certainly if I get to the contract stage with an offer, I'm not then turning around and applying to something else after that. I mean, if there's existing applications that are out there or existing processes, that's that's a different situation. But I would not actively go looking for something else. If you are in the contract stage, just know, and then another offer comes through that you really do need to take or want to take. Just know that the district that you've contracted with does have the right to hold you at least for a certain period of time. With our district, it's 60 days, and most districts around here are 60 days. So that means that they can hold you up to that length of time before they release you from the contract. So if that is a situation you find yourself in, with the new district that's giving you an offer, you need to be upfront with them saying, I am under a signed contract with my current district. Let me find out what their intention would be, because the new district would need to know that as well as far as their decision-making process.
And do your homework on where you live, because it varies from state to state. Like in South Carolina, if you sign a contract, that's a legal binding document at that point, and you're expected to be there. And so at that point, Human Resources has the latitude to basically make application to the State Department of Education to revoke your teaching certificate if you renege on that contract. Now, a lot of times, if it's a good reason, and if they can work things out, they can find another candidate, this and the other. A lot of times they won't go after that. But just put this in perspective. If it's the second week of July and band camp starting the following week, and you get this amazing offer and in this amazing program, and you sign with us in April, the likely chance that they're going to release you from your contract is probably little to none. So that's the reason why I just say, just be very, very careful. When you sign that dotted line, you need to be, you need to know that it's, it might not necessarily be completely cemented in stone, but at least on our end, it's going to be very difficult to unwind that, once it's done. And also, and again, this is specific to my school district, we also have a 3-year rule. So once you sign on and you're at your school, you must teach in that school for 3 years before you're eligible for a transfer. And again, this is not all school districts. This is just in ours. So do your homework in the district that you're applying to figure out, once you sign this contract and you're hired on, what's the expectation in terms of how long it's going to be before you could potentially move to another school within that district. Okay.
I think, Brad, just to kind of wrap things up here, in the case that someone if you didn't get the job, it is perfectly all right to ask the interviewing committee chair. It's like, for pointers, was there something in my materials? Was there something in my interview that, I can improve upon for my next thing? Everybody wants to see you succeed. Maybe this position wasn't the one for you, but that doesn't mean that, we don't see you being successful in something else. So to the degree that, some, advice or guidance could be provided, people are always happy to help you along your journey within this. And I think it's always going to be hard when you don't get something, particularly if you really, really want it. But try not to think of it that you lost something, that you lost the opportunity. You don't know anything about the other candidates. You don't know about the situation of the search. You don't know all the ins and outs of that. I've had searches where I had 4 finalists. Of any one of them I would have been happy with. And so it wasn't that it was, the other candidates were bad quality. And so I try not to beat yourself up over something that you missed an opportunity on, because there's just so many things that go into a search that are in your control and so many that are out of your control.
Mm-hmm. So I have a couple. This has been fantastic information, guys. Really, really appreciate it. And somebody that's watching just shared that they were aware of a situation where a tenured director wanted to move to another school, but didn't inform their existing principal. And then when they were offered the job at the other school, the principal, can see where that went. So let's all be professional and communicative. I do have one question, Brad, backing up, and then we're going to wrap this up.
Sure.
Way back earlier in the conversation, you mentioned that it's appropriate for the person who's there being interviewed to have some questions. You said maybe 3 or 4 questions to ask themselves.
Yeah.
You weren't specific about what those might be. So could you give me a couple of examples
Sure.
of what would be an appropriate question for me to ask? I mean, I think I have a couple ideas, but I wanted to hear that from you.
So I think the questions could be very global. So, some question might be back to the principal, what is your expectation, or what is your vision? What do you want to see out of this program? Sometimes the person doing the hiring, if they're the school level principal, depending on their involvement and how much they know about band, they may be able to be very specific with you. If they don't have a whole lot of background in band, they may not be able to give you specifics about that. They may just want to say, hey, I want a big band and I want them to sound good and I want kids to be happy, But I think you need to ask some of those questions about, like, what is the expectation. I think it is appropriate, especially if students are in the interview, to ask the students, what do you want out of the band director? What do you want to see? Things that principals probably will not be prepared to answer right off the cuff. But if you really want to know, things about, like, the facilities, the equipment, the budget. So I think those are questions that you can ask. And again, going back to, we as band directors, we want to know, how much money do we have to work with? Where is it coming from? Is it, at the district level? Is it coming? How much is coming from my principal? How much is coming from Booster Club? The individuals sitting in that interview may or may not be able to give you that information. So, like, when I'm sitting in an interview, typically I can answer all of the school and the district stuff, but I'm not going to be able to answer, like, how much a Booster Club is providing back. So there's maybe some questions that you may need to pose to them, or maybe pose to them and then see how much of that they can answer. And then if you really want to know the remaining answers, if there's not a Booster Club officer in there, then maybe you can post that back in when you send your follow-up email thanking them, just to say, if I'm going to be moving forward as a candidate, I'd really like to know the following, things like that. Stephen, anything else that you can think of?
No, I think you're hitting it on the head there. Ultimately, your questions give you an opportunity to, and specifically if the interviewing panel doesn't have a deep music background, your questions offer you another opportunity for you to sell them on your vision of what you want a program to look like. Mm-hmm. And so that is just, it's that, I think that as much as anything, that's a powerful thing, a powerful stance for an interviewee to be in. It's like, I have this vision of what I want to be as a teacher. I have this vision of what I want a program to look like and operate. I want it to be, these are the dynamics I want to have in play here. And so, these questions can offer you an insight of, how amenable are they to your vision of what you were looking for professionally.
And Tim, if you don't mind, one last bit of information. This is really not even about questions, something I meant to say way back early on. If you are a veteran teacher, 1+ years, I'm going to call that veteran, it is crucial and essential that you keep all communication, every answer positive. So, in other words, in the interview, you should not bring up negative things about your current administration or the parents of your current program or the students or the district or anything like that, because for those who are sitting on the other side as doing the interview, the thought is, at least from my perspective, the thought is, okay, well, when things don't necessarily go your way here, are you going to be saying the same thing about our school or our district? So it's always just really positive, the old phrase, if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. Just keep it positive. You can always spin it as, because they may ask you, why are you interested in this position in the school? You can always spin it as, I'm looking for a different experience. I'm looking to change geographic areas. I want to move from middle school to high school, or this band has an amazing reputation and I would be honored to be the next person. You can always spin it in a positive direction. But the last thing that you ever want to do is say, well, my principal doesn't support me, so I'm ready to pack my bags and get out of there.
And there's ways you can, absolutely right. There's ways you can talk about, maybe the things that are maybe pushing you out of a current role, but you can say, let's say it's scheduling. Let's say they're scheduling.
Yeah.
You can say with the school that you're interviewing, it's like, I noticed that you schedule your beginning instruction or middle school band meets 5 days a week. That is the most important model I have seen to be most effective. And that is a schedule model that I know will guarantee, the grounds for success for the program. And you don't have to talk about, it's like, well, my principal back in such and such didn't, we met twice a week, so it's ways of pointing to the things that are attractive about that program that you can seek in comparison, because your lived experience and you're looking at what they offer without necessarily talking backwards on the place you're coming from.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, one of my takeaways from this whole conversation is that you keep talking about being professional, right? In all the different ways, in the interview, in your communication, and everybody, if you weren't here or if you didn't hear that's in the beginning of this, having Big Booty 44 as your email address is not a good idea. Okay, right? You know what I mean? Like, give yourself everything professional in this whole thing. And if you don't know, if you're not sure what that is, then talk to a professional and find out. Right? Have that mentor, somebody you can ask, okay, wait a minute, what should I be wearing? Have somebody that you can ask those questions to. This conversation we're having is sponsored by Leaders Creating Leaders, who has a wonderful set of mentors that they are helping people with. And so if you need some help with a mentor and you don't have one, reach out to Leaders Creating Leaders at leaderscreating.com, and they will help you out. I love the ideas that you guys shared on this whole thing. Lots and lots of practical, great information. So thank you, Dr. Lytle and Bradley. Thank you guys so much for your time.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Brad.
Really appreciate it. Thanks everybody for watching.